All right. Good evening to this fifth online macrobiotic winter conference. So it's already been 5 years, and at least I think for us here in the Northeast, where it's always iffy to go anywhere in the winter time, it's a really great way to connect and to see everybody. See everybody in the summer, hopefully soon in person again. But at least in the winter, also touch base through the winter conference and, stay in touch. I think this is very important. So, welcome everybody. Glad to have you here. Really great to see you all. And let's have a wonderful time. Alex.
Well, thank you, Bettina, and welcome everyone. Happy New Year. As Bettina said, this is the fifth time that we've done the online winter conference. We've had now, I think, two online summer conferences and probably a third one coming up in this coming summer. Anyway, we're delighted to see you on behalf of Planetary Health, which is our sponsor of the summer conference, the Amber Waves Grassroots Network and newsletter, and all of our other projects and activities, including the Spirit of Rice film documentary that you'll be hearing about in the course of the conference. Anyway, I'd like to welcome you. I'm here with my friend Donka here in the Berkshires, and we're happy to see all of you and looking forward to a delightful evening and next several days.
All right. So let me start with a few things of housekeeping. In the beginning, what I will do usually is I will mute everybody so that whoever is doing a presentation is not getting interrupted by background sounds from radios or dogs barking or doors slamming or something like this. So, and of course, during the question and answer sessions of any of the sessions that we have, feel free to unmute yourself so that you can ask the question. But for if you know that you have background noises, please mute yourself and stay muted for the time of the presentation. Also, of course, we are all different people, and it's wonderful to see everybody, but there may be different opinions. So please be respectful to one another, because only that way we can move forward, whether it's in a smaller gathering here or in the world. I think it's very important that we respect our various opinions. Then also there is the chat. If I mean, on my Zoom screen, there's a bottom toolbar, so to speak, and there it says chat. When I look in the chat, or when I click on the chat, I can find the chat where there's two options. One option is I can send a direct message to one person, or the other option is I can send a message to everyone. So this is the dynamic. Please, when you're sending a message, check whether it's a message to one person or to everybody. In case you wish to send somebody a private message and it suddenly appears with everybody, it's not my fault. Let's see. I generally will send or have it scheduled that the links for the Zoom invites will be sent out the night before for the next day. So tomorrow's Zoom invitation will be sent out while we're talking this evening. You should have it in your inbox. It will be resent sometime before the session starts tomorrow. So, and again, please check your junk folder, your spam folder, etc. But if you really didn't have it, I will send it to you. But please don't wait until the start of the session to let me know that you didn't receive it, because I just got a message from somebody, but it's not so easy to go back and forth into my email while I'm talking to other people to send you another link. Let's see. There is also the option in the bottom toolbar under reactions. If you go to reactions, you can raise your hand if there's a presentation, but you really have a question that needs to be answered right then and there. You could raise your hand. You can also, do other reactions, as you can see: clapping, thumbs up, love, it's funny, whatever. So those are other options. You can, while I usually will have the format of this in speaker view, so that the one speaker or the two speakers that are doing the presentation are, in the center view. But generally, you have the option. It's usually like in my format of Zoom, it's on the top right corner. There's a little icon, and next to it, it says View. And if you click on that, you usually have several choices: speaker view, gallery view. In mine, it also has immersive. Yeah. So those are the options. So you can change it around depending on how you would like to view your screen. I will be recording all sessions. So if you are having questions to the presenter at the end, that will be part of the recording. The recordings, of course, this recording here from today's session is free and available to the public. So if you do not wish to be in it, then I ask you to, if you have a question, then, then please take your camera down so that nobody can see you. Then, there's no privacy issue. Alex, anything else that you can think of?
No, I think we're going to go over the schedule right now, and there are a few procedural things that we'll be looking at in just a few minutes.
Well, let's look at. Can you see the schedule?
Yes.
Okay, let me enlarge that a little bit. Okay, so let's go over the schedule real quick so that you can take a look at what we have planned. And I sent it out with the invitation, so you should have it. But maybe, Alex, if I could ask you to start this, because there were a few people that just emailed me they would like that. I will just go back and do that real quick.
Yeah, all right. So you'll notice under Wednesday, January 19th, we're presently doing the welcome and orientation down there at the bottom under the evening keynote. Beginning tomorrow, we've intentionally left the mornings free because we've got a lot of feedback in recent years that the schedule is a little bit intense and people need to do their errands and so forth. So please do those Thursday and Friday morning. Our first class will begin after lunch with Melanie Waxman, who will be presenting from Spain. Melanie is a longtime macrobiotic chef, counselor, and advisor for the Shaw Wellness Center. She's a very dynamic and creative cook, and we'll be talking about creative winter cooking. Susan Krieger will follow at about 4 o'clock after a half-hour break. Susan Krieger now lives in Florida. She's lived in New York for many years. She's a macrobiotic teacher, counselor, and acupuncturist. And we'll be talking about Chinese medicine and showing us some new techniques. Always very exciting to see Susan. She's a very effective healer. All 3 days, or full 3 days, we have from India a very special treat. We have Manjari Agarwala, who will be giving us yoga instruction. You may remember Manjari from the summer conference this past July, early August, in which she gave a cooking class with Tarika on macrobiotic Indian cooking. She's a macrobiotic teacher as well as an Ayurveda specialist and has been teaching yoga for many years. Then at about 6 to 7:30 in between classes, we have the open discussion. And Donna Clifford and Mark Leonis, who are on our staff and are both macrobiotic teachers, will be hosting the open discussions. So maybe Donna and Mark could briefly just introduce themselves and say a little bit about these sessions.
Donna and Mark, if you're there, if you could unmute yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Mark.
Hello,
Pleasure to
Mark.
be here. Pleasure to be here as always. Obviously, we'd all prefer to be in person, but here we are. So Don and I are prepared, as we have been in the past, to field any questions, concerns, interest things during the discussion groups. We look forward to that.
Great, thank you.
And hi, I'm Donna. I'm very excited to be here and to have our discussion groups and, answer questions or bring up any topics that you may be wondering about, or maybe get some interesting conversations going and have fun.
Yeah, so Donna is, of course, also very knowledgeable because she's been in the health field for many, many years. She is right now still a nurse practitioner, but she's been also, working in the alternative arena for, I don't know, many, many years.
Many years, 40 or so.
40 years or so. So she's balancing both the Western and the Eastern approach, which is really lovely.
Thank you.
All right, then to go back to the schedule, tomorrow evening, I'll be giving the evening lecture entitled Diagnosing Monet, Van Gogh, and Modern Art. And we'll be looking at how particularly Impressionism and to some extent Post-Impressionism has served as a bridge between the early modern and late modern worlds, also a bridge between East and West. We'll be looking at the diet and lifestyle of these great painters and some of their most famous works. So I strongly encourage you to join that lecture if you can tomorrow. It'll be a slideshow and we'll be looking at many different canvases. Then on Friday, our schedule begins at 2 o'clock, and my companion Adanka will be giving a cooking class. She's right here and she'll just introduce it briefly.
Okay, so I will be giving a cooking class on cooking without baking. As we all know, baked foods and especially bread are very delicious, but if we really overdo it, they are not so good for our bodies. So in this class, I would like to show you a few very simple but very tasty recipes that will satisfy your cravings after bread and other bread products, and share many new tips and ways how to make those cravings disappear. So if you are looking for new ways how to lighten up your diet, or for or lessening the amount of flour products, please join me. And all these dishes are especially very delicious for children. So if you have small children, please come.
Yeah, thank you, Danka. She didn't mention, but Danka is from Slovakia in Central Europe, and she's been macrobiotic since childhood. And her profession is as a lawyer. And so she's been in the United States now for 6 months, and we've been working together on many projects. Hey, Bettina, do you want to pick it up from here?
Sure. So after Danka's cooking class, we'll have a lecture by Dr. Neil Barnard, whom many of you have seen before, have heard before. He will be sharing on women's health issues, hormonal problems, menopause, and nutrition. While, maybe the men feel left out, but the majority of the participants are women. So I think it is a great topic, but he is gracious enough to join us. And so come and listen and have your questions ready at the end, because, he has the ability to give us a different perspective on these issues. And then we will once again, having Manjari do yoga. And actually, one of our friends here has taken a private yoga class with Manjari, and she said it was really, really fabulous. So we're really looking forward to having Manjari do some yoga with us, especially since we're sitting in front of the computer. Really, the little bit of stretching in between will do us all some good. And then we will once again or you will have the option of joining the free discussion with Donna and Mark. And the discussion always runs as long as there is our topics, and when the topic is finished, then the discussion stops. That's just how it goes. So if people are joining, great, and if people need to have a rest, then that'll be fine too. And then, of course, that evening we will have the memorial tribute to Edward Esco. And yeah, there's quite a few people from all over the world that are participating. Not everybody, is wishing to speak, but Ed had traveled a lot, and so he has touched a lot of people all around the world. So we're happy to have all of them join us and hear from some of them. Well, and then on Saturday at 11, I will be teaching a cooking class, cooking for body, soul, and spirit. So for our, the different parts of ourselves, because we all have a physical body. 99% have a soul, and everybody has a spirit. I guess there are some soulless beings in this world, but it's really not very many. So cooking for body, soul, and spirit, so we can really align ourselves, come to our center, and make the most of our life. And many of you know my cooking classes. I usually present not too complicated things that are easily reproduced at home, and that usually result in, a good meal or fun meal, and also good nourishment for that matter. Then at lunchtime, once again, there's the option of the free discussion session with Donna and Mark. These sessions are really valuable, and so join if you can, if you wish. And then after lunch at 2, we will see Jarka and Jarka Yarkamova, I think that's her name, and Carol Bakvar from the Netherlands, who will do a cooking class on stay safe and make your health vibrant now. So really excited about their class. And is Sherry here? Sherry, are you here? Let me just see. Uh,
No, she's not.
okay. Then we will hear from Sherry about the Spirit of Rice project that she is, well, I think getting closer to finish. So, yeah, we will hear from her and also her co-producer. So I think that'll be very interesting to hear a little bit more. Then we will be joined by Manjari once again for a half an hour yoga session. That evening, we'll have a free discussion with Alex and myself. So you can join again the free discussion session if you so choose. And in the evening, usually we don't have that late cooking classes, but because of the time difference, we have Kimberly Ashton giving us a traditional Chinese macrobiotic cuisine. I think you'll enjoy that. Also about the 5 transformations, very interesting. So, Alex, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add about Kimberly. She's partly Chinese, and she had a macrobiotic and a Whole Foods studio in Shanghai, I think, for 16 years. So at the moment, I believe she may be in Australia. But anyway, she goes back and forth to China quite frequently and is well versed in what's going on there. So we look forward to that. Then on Sunday, our first class will be cooking class with Patricio Garcia de Paredes from Japan. Patricio has lived in Japan for, I don't know, 20 or 25 years. He has a family there. His mother was Luci Baranda, some of you may know, great macrobiotic cooking teacher at the Kushi Institute. And Patricio is widely considered to be one of the rock stars of the macrobiotic movement because of his wonderful cooking and his polished, suave manner. And anyway, we're very much looking forward to that. That will be followed at 12:30 to 1:30. There'll be no free discussion on Sunday, but Bill Terra from London will be talking about the mystery of food. Bill is one of the great elders and founders of the modern macrobiotic movement. He helped found Erewhon with the Kushis. He was a recipient of the Mikko Kushi Peace Prize a couple years ago, and he and his wife, Marlene, have a large macrobiotic center and following in the UK. And then at 2 o'clock, after a half-hour break, we will reconvene for the Health Forum. And Bill will continue and join Bettina and myself. And then our special guest, Dr. Summer White. Summer, as some of you may know, macrobiotic physician based in Nashville, and who has studied and graduated from the Kushi Institute, as well as worked in the medical profession for the last 20, 25 years. So we'll be taking your questions and concerns related to health and well-being. This may be the time for some of you to talk about COVID, any COVID or vaccine-related questions. That might be an opportunity, though you can also talk about those at the open discussions. And then finally, Jessica Porter, who is from Los Angeles, and some of you may know is a wonderful macrobiotic teacher. She's also a professional comedian and a very, very funny woman. She'll be talking about the 7 levels of being alive in the 21st century. So she's always, often my favorite teacher, so I'm really looking forward to that. And then finally, we'll have a closing and farewell and final thoughts and reflections. So that is our conference, and of course, subject to change as everything else. And we're looking forward to studying together and having a really wonderful time.
Thank you. And now we were just going to take a moment also to think of all people that have like take a minute of silence for all the people that have passed away this year. Alex, do you have that there? Because I have too many.
Yeah, well, as we said before, we're having special memorial ceremony or service in memory of our dear friend and colleague Edward Esco, who passed away in December, and that will be on Friday evening. But of course, life and death are just natural parts of the natural world, and so we like to commemorate everyone else who's passed away in the macrobiotic community. And so we'd like to take a minute to send them our thoughts and prayers. These include Warren Kramer, who's a longtime teacher at the Cahokia Institute and for Planetary Health, and many of our summer and winter conferences. Waddy Filer passed away this past year. Some of you may remember Waddy. Waddy was, I think he was almost 99 years old. Anyway, he was living and dancing very actively right up until the end. He called me once a couple of years ago on his cell phone. He was driving down to Florida. He was still developing housing projects, and a really amazing person. Margaret Lawson passed away this summer. Margaret was the longtime head of the macrobiotic community in Dallas, Texas. And when I lived there 30 years ago, she was very active, and I worked with her on a variety of projects. She passed away. She was in her mid-80s and really wonderful woman. Mark Hanna passed away also this past year. Mark was a chef for many of our macrobiotic conferences, and I believe the cruises, Holiday at Sea. He lived in, I think, Spain or France. Michelle Boucher, we also remember. She worked at the Cahokia Institute in administration for a number of years. Alice Jutras also worked at the Cahokia Institute. She passed away this past year. Bettina reminded me that one of the students named Tachio also passed away more recently. I don't remember him myself. Also, Sheldon Rice, who many of you may have met, who was a American who lived in Israel, and his wife, Ganat, sponsored the Macrobiotic Forum, which over the last year or so has been broadcasting events monthly from Israel. He will be greatly missed. And then there were several other macrobiotic friends who were commemorated in a special memorial issue of Macrobiotics Today, which just came out early this morning. You can all Google it. It's a free issue and has many wonderful articles and reminiscences about Ed, by Bettina, by myself, by several other friends, as well as some of the other people that I just mentioned. And then finally, I'd like to just mention one other person I would really add to this list, and that was poet Robert Bly. Some of you may remember Robert Bly, who was one of the great American poets, but in the 70s and early 80s, he was very active in the macrobiotic community. And he came to see us when I was working at the East-West Journal. And I remember once he had been invited by Micho to give a keynote address at the summer conference. And we drove from Boston out to Amherst. And as we got closer and closer to Amherst, Robert kept looking very intently on both sides of the road. And I said, "What are you looking for?" He says, "I'm getting hunger pains." He says, I'm not going to be able to eat some of my favorite junk foods for a week. So I'd like to stop and kind of load up before we go to the summer conference. So he wasn't really practicing so much. He's kind of new to it, but he loved the philosophy of macrobiotics and the East-West twist and all of that. So anyway, I include him as at least an honorary macrobiotic friend for many years, Robert Bly. Rest in peace. So let's just take a moment to silently send our thoughts and prayers to all of these friends and many others whom we don't know, but who are out there.
And thank you, everybody. Okay, and for the next section, I mean, we still have a few things that we are doing this evening. So I will talk on the energy of food next, and then Alex will speak on Cahokia. And then we will have a short discussion about 9-star key this upcoming year. And finally, some questions and answer, the planetary health activities, and our good night then. But so I think we shall move right along, unless there's something else, Alex.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk for a moment about the energy of food, perhaps from a little different perspective. You can have the same vegetable. Let's take a squash that are grown in the same area, but from different farmers, or you can have breads baked, again in similar areas with the same ingredients, and they may be all organic, and yet energetically, they can be very different, affecting us very different, affecting us in a way where we can be provided with very high energy, wonderful, excellent energy, mediocre energy, or perhaps it's, devoid of energy, or in the worst case scenario, it may even deplete our energy. Native American Indians and all other cultures still living basically in connection with Mother Earth have long since known that depending on where and how herbs and medicinal plants grow, they might be very effective for, improving the body, or not so effective. So if we look at medicinal herbs or plants growing in the high mountains or other remote areas in this world, basically in undisturbed environments, versus the same plants, the same seeds planted in the lowlands near a village or a city, yes, you would have the same plant, and even if you try to have the same soil quality, air quality, water quality, but the energy of the plant would not be the same, the energy signature of the plant. And, both kinds of plants, the plants grown in the remote areas and the plants grown in the lowlands, they share their energy with other plants, with the animals, with the celestial bodies, with Mother Earth, but still the energy signature is very different. The plants grown in the remote areas or in the high mountains are, mostly growing undisturbed from negative influences. And, a lot of the negative influences these days actually come from, unfortunately, us humans. So the plants that are growing up in the remote areas, they have patterns that are harmonious, radiating with brightness and contentment. So they, radiate with a high vibration, and they provide high vibration. They provide strength and clarity when we consume them. But the same plants planted in the lowlands near a village or city, they are exposed to our field of consciousness from us humans. And, if we think of just how our own energy is influenced by, let's say, watching a movie or watching the news or other people around us, every person's individual state of thoughts and feelings creates a field of collective consciousness, and that influences everything around us, including all the plants growing in the vicinity. And while I'm not saying, of course, that every person has low energy frequency, but the energy signature of the collective consciousness, of course, at this time in our world is certainly not high frequency. And I think everybody can relate to that if when we're thinking about how, many people are glued to the news, and the news primarily reports on what we have to fear or what we have to, hate perhaps. And, these kind of dynamics, the fear, the dislike, these create a low frequency in our collective consciousness. And this kind of dynamic, unfortunately, also extends to the plants grown near where the humans reside. Whereas the plants growing undisturbed in nature far away from our so-called civilized way of doing and being, their energetic signature usually radiates with love, with sharing, cooperation, and connectedness with everything. So, of course, eating these kind of foods, like the herbs, medicinal plants, these foods can help us to return to our inherent nature, which is love. And, so the importance is really that we can actually begin to remember our own core energy, which is love, which, we may have covered up with many layers of shining wrapping paper so that we may forget or have forgotten. But remembering who we truly are, that can really help to raise the collective field of consciousness and ultimately, raise the quality of our foods and everything around us. And of course, I'm not saying that everybody now should run out into the mountains and plunder the herbs and medicinal plants. That's not the purpose. But what I'm trying to say here is that when we can all do our bit to improving the quality of our food and the quality of our world, if we remember our own core center. So, and of course also let's look at this. Let's say I have a carrot. I have in one hand a carrot grown by a local farmer, and the other carrot may be grown the other carrot may be organic but is grown by a large company, and this large company, the sole purpose of it is for profit margin. So the carrot grown for the sole purpose of profit margin is probably overlaid with the energy of competition and comparison, survival of the fittest, and, ultimately at the root of the energy is fear. The local farmer, who may have a small farm, may not have the funds to get the organic certification, but grows these vegetables because it is his or her inherent calling, because he or she loves to do that, this kind of energy, of course, at the root is love. And so this kind of energy will help to raise our consciousness. So the carrot that is grown with love is filled with more light and love. And of course, we also have to understand that any unprocessed plant food is inherently a light food. Light food meaning it uses photosynthesis or light to grow. And of course, that means it will help to connect with our light body. And we all have a light body. We all have the physical body, and then we have, these non-physical bodies, non-physical layers like the etheric body, the light body. So eating any unprocessed plant foods at least keeps the status quo of our light body. But if, the energy at the root of the plant, the energy is also laced with love, with more love, then it will even, give us more energy. If it's if the core energy that this carrot was grown under was laced with fear, then it will not really raise our vibration more. And we are many times, most of us are not that aware of that, not consciously aware of that. But that does not mean that we will not receive these energies. Just because we're not consciously aware of them doesn't mean that they don't immediately go into our sub or unconscious mind. So, the question is, what do we prefer? The root energy being love or the root energy being fear? So, sometimes we really have to make a choice who we wish to support. Or let's take another example. Let's take maybe crackers. Crackers, usually some kind of flour product, some kind of processed food. And these days you can find many high-end crackers, and by high-end, of course, I mean high price. And just because something is expensive, unfortunately, it doesn't mean that it's good or a high energy food, even though, of course, the clever marketing strategies would label it as such. In my opinion, many of these specialty foods have a very specific kind of energy signature, and not always in our best interest. Many of them, in my opinion, have the energy signature of exclusiveness, something like, we're better than you, we're better than the rest of the world. And when we eat this kind of food frequently, then of course on a subconscious level, these beliefs and judgments are incorporated into our own being, and they are operating from behind the scenes. We don't even see how it plays out in our lives. But this means that people ultimately exhibit behaviors that, first of all, are not truly theirs and are also not in their or everybody else's best interest. So, some of these, in my opinion, of course, some of these so-called high power foods are really overlaid with energies that are not so great for us. And, so what I would really like you to become aware of is to begin to sensitize yourself to these non-physical energies. Because while, in our world, many things are matter, physical, and that's what we're used to dealing with. But becoming discerning to these subtle or fine energy signatures as well, not only of food, but of course food is a great start. And along with that, of course, we also learn to become more discerning of ourselves and learn more about ourselves. And unfortunately, what I find is in our Western world that our nervous system has often become somewhat dull to a lesser or sometimes greater extent due to conditioning, toxins in air, water, food, overworking, overstressing, excess junk food, addictions of all kinds, over medicating, over anxiety, etc., etc. So, what can we do to become more sensitive again and rebuild our nervous system? So, there are three basic things. Number one, beginning by eating a more plant-based diet. Many of you are doing that with whole grains, beans, bean products, lots of vegetables, sea vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds. All of these are light foods that help to connect our physical body with our light body. And then also, of course, with eating a more plant-based diet, to make connections with and support farmers and growers who grow their food with love, care, and respect. That really helps. Number two, to help sensitize ourselves via breathing exercises, primarily through the nose. Really just deep breathing exercises, not only up here into the lungs, but into the lower part of the abdominal area. So daily deep breathing helps to connect us with spirit and intuition. Spirare in Latin means to breathe, and breathing as well as smelling helps to connect us with our spirit and intuitive aspect. So enjoying the various smells and scents when you're cooking, that can really be a useful tool for connecting with spirit. And many times, you smell something and you have a sudden image of something that happened at some point or so. So this is, of course, how spirit works. And finally, three, for connecting more with our soul, having more fun, laughing more, doing things that we enjoy every day. And I mean, of course, with harm to none. That helps to connect us with our soul aspect. So, these are ways that we can raise our frequency individually, which then helps to raise the collective field of consciousness, and that can ultimately also help to establish a culture of food that is truly high frequency food, grown with love, care, and resulting then in an ascending spiral of higher frequency for us and the planet. So, when you're cooking, allow yourself to feel the energy of the food. Hold maybe the vegetable in your hand, close your eyes for a moment, and just sense its energy. And, whatever you feel, whatever you sense, there's no right or wrong, but just, making a real connection with it in a different way than we're used to. And also, of course, thanking the food for its service to us. So in other words, of course, we can speak to the food because everything has consciousness, including, of course, the molecules and atoms of the vegetables. And also blessing the food can raise the energy of the food. And, most ancient traditions like in India, in China, Native Americans, and many others, they all knew this. And in India, still, they have in many traditional households, they actually use chants to raise the energy and frequency of the food. But, you can simply, with intention, either speak or think, something towards a food, and it will be received. And especially because most vegetables, most plant foods are to a great degree also made up of water. And you may have heard of the book that Masaru Emoto has popularized again, The Hidden Messages in Water. So, we can use intention to raise the frequency of anything that we have. And even if you're walking by a field of vegetables that are growing, or if you're walking by a river, or if you're going through the aisle of water bottles in the supermarket, expand your love for these foods so that the love can be received to them and they can distribute it and everybody will benefit, as long as it's really just you just wish to send your love, no strings attached. So yeah, or of course you can, if you wish to keep your vegetables in the refrigerator longer, maybe you have to go on a trip and you don't want your vegetables to go bad very quickly while you're away, then you can kindly speak to your vegetables with either in words or with your imagination, basically just telling them that you're really looking forward to seeing them when you return, and they usually stay fresh for a much longer time. So these kind of things have a real effect. So this is what I would like to share with you on the energy of food. Any questions at this moment? If not, then we will go to Alex right now. And Alex, if you would begin your presentation now.
Yeah, thank you, Bettina. That was a wonderful synthesis of the personal, the social, and the spiritual. And it reminds me to talk more to my fruits and vegetables and grains and beans. All right. Okay, I'm going to share the screen now. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was born in Chicago, and growing up in the Chicago area, I remained almost completely unaware of the Native American heritage in my own state, even though both Chicago and Illinois derive from indigenous names. Last couple years, I've been working on a project called Spiral of History, a series of books. And in the course of my research, I learned for the first time about Cahokia, the great Native American city at the confluence of the Mississippi, the Missouri, and the Illinois rivers in present-day southern Illinois. At its peak in the 13th century, its population was larger than that of London, and it reached about 20 to 40,000 people, the largest city in North America until the late 18th century. Cahokia was occupied for about 7 centuries, between 600 and 1350, and it ultimately included about 120 mounds, vast ceremonial plazas, and homes for thousands and thousands of people. Its great mound, pictured above here, soared nearly 100 feet over the prairie, and its base was about the same size as the Great Pyramid in Egypt and larger than the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan in Mexico. Cahokia formed the largest human-made structure, the mound, on the continent until a New York skyscraper exceeded it in the late 19th century. Cahokia was the center of a sophisticated and flourishing cultural and trade network whose roots went back several millennia and included many other mounds, earthworks, and cities throughout the East, Southeast, and Midwest, created by settled agricultural people. Traces of of cotton and chocolate connect the city-state with the Mayas, the Toltecs, the Aztec, and other high civilizations in Mexico. Yet for 400 years, Native American history and culture has been almost entirely erased and destroyed. Generations of Americans have been brought up to believe that our country was virtually uninhabited when the first Europeans arrived. And conventional wisdom holds that there were certainly no native settled towns or cities, much less monumental architecture or complex mathematics and astronomy, or other hallmarks of civilization. Growing up, like many of you, I was fascinated with the pyramids of Egypt, the wondrous temples in Angkor Wat, and lost cities of the Yucatan. But little did I suspect that there was a vast pyramidal civilization in North America, centered in the very state where I was born and lived and grew up. Okay, this slide shows some of the products of the Cahokian arts and cultures. In the upper left, we have a statue of a Mother Earth or goddess type figure who was very prominent in the culture. To the right top, then we have some of the early pottery, including cups and vessels inscribed with spirals. Spirals show a deep understanding of natural order, universal cycles, and the logarithmic form and pattern that connects all things. And then finally, in the lower right hand, shows the some of the artwork from a copper workshop in which Cahokian artisans produce masks, earrings, and other jewelry items that may have figured in ceremonial or religious rituals. Danka, when we were looking at this slide earlier today, she said, oh, that's Shiva, the Hindu god with many arms and limbs. But anyway, it was the North American counterpart. Anyway, very interesting. Okay, originally, women played a key role in the founding, growth, and development of Cahokia. Women served as the region's farmers, as they did in other parts of North America. Spiritual life was centered around a divine, feminine divine figure known as the Old Woman who never dies. And she represented the vegetative and grandmother deity or spirit. Okay, what were the Cahokians eating? For many centuries, the main food of Cahokia consisted primarily of domesticated cereal grains, including chenapod, which is pictured here. This is a tasty quinoa-like plant. Also maygrass, knotweed, and little barley. Wild rice also grew throughout North America, not just at the Great Lakes during this era, and was enjoyed in this region as well. The cooks in Cahokia complemented their grains with squash and other vegetables, as well as beans, and they made stews, porridges, and bread. They also gathered a wide variety of fruits, seeds, and nuts, and they ate a small or modest amount of animal foods, including deer, antelope, and fish. Okay, Cahokia reached a peak in the 12th and 13th centuries. Its population suddenly swelled, its commerce flourished, and it dominated the entire middle part of the continent. Historians and anthropologists attribute this dramatic growth to the adoption of maize or corn as the main staple. Similar flourishing developed in the Yucatan and the Mexico Valley among the Maya and the Aztecs, where corn also was introduced several centuries earlier and became the principal food. A beverage known as the black drink figured in ceremonies at Cahokia. It was made from the roasted leaves of the Yopan holly and contained 6 times as much caffeine as strong coffee. It is believed to have been used in purification rituals before festivals, battles, and other key events. And its stimulating effects induced sweating, vomiting, and purging. With its large expanded kernels, maize or corn is the most lean of the regular cereal grains that humans have consumed. And in the macrobiotic healthcare, it corresponds with what we call fire energy, whose principal organ is the heart. Excessive maize or corn intake accompanied the cult of human sacrifice among the Maya and the Aztecs, as well as the Incas in South America. Hearts were literally plucked out of the body in elaborate rituals and offered to the gods. The Mesoamericans were eating rattlesnakes, iguanas, and other reptiles at this time, as well as drinking copious amounts of chocolate that, at least in my view, caused them to lose their senses. When corn came to Cahokia, a similar phenomenon took place. The extreme foods, in this case, consisted also perhaps of excessive animal food to balance the more lean nature of the corn, but also perhaps too much salt, which is concentrated particularly in the lower Mississippi River Delta region, corresponding with Cahokia, and then this coffee-like beverage, the black drink, that was super high in caffeine. So while Cahokia started out as a peaceful, egalitarian, feminist society, it developed into an authoritarian, patriarchal regime. In one mound, archaeologists have found more than 250 skeletons, about 2/3 of which were sacrificial victims. There's evidence of the rise of a warrior cult whose symbol was the falcon, a bird of prey. So evidently too much maize, too much animal food, and too much of the black drink, in other words, extreme yin and yang foods, led to the rise of a delusional worldview that introduced social stratification, intertribal warfare, and human sacrifice. The warlike culture collapsed of its own accord within several generations. As people started to flee the area, they moved away from Cahokia to escape its oppressive new rulers and orientation, and the civilization collapsed about 100 or 150 years before the Europeans came. Okay, lessons from Cahokia. The original whole grain-based culture centered on chenapod, or goosefoot as it's called, wild rice, and other cereal plants, were governed, as I said, by females, and that helps to explain the generally harmonious and peaceful nature of North American civilizations, compared especially to those in Europe, Asia, and Northern Africa. Unlike the Old World with its cattle, oxen, and horses, Native Americans did not have domesticated farm animals or the wheel for wagons and carts. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, China, India, and other Eurasian regions, superior male upper body strength ultimately led men to take control of plowing and hence the food supply, especially increased breeding of livestock. In North America, women retained control of food and agriculture until finally uprooted by colonial white settlement. So it was a really big difference. Then the tribal communities took flight, turned nomadic, and grew dependent on buffalo hunting. During this very brief period, Native American males began to model their behavior and their lifestyle to some extent on their white counterparts, They consumed large amounts of beef, pork, and heavy animal food. They indulged in white flour, sugar, and whiskey, and grew increasingly violent. So there's a lot to learn from Cahokia, the lost and forgotten civilization in our nation's heartland. And unless we take to heart its dietary and agricultural lessons, our modern society may be destined to repeat its tragic mistakes.
Thank you, Alex. A wonderful presentation on, the history that is close by that is really not taught anywhere. So, give me a second here. So now let's take a quick look at the upcoming year in terms of 9-star key. This coming year, well, will be interesting to say the least. Of course, every year is interesting. But we are going into a 5 solar year, and let me share the screen with you so we can look at what that looks like. Alright. Give me a second, this didn't work. Where is it here? Right, let me do that again. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Very good. So this is considered the standard chart for 9-star key with the 5 in the center. And the 1 is in the north, the 9 is in the south. In other words, every number is in its own original house. The 3 is in the east, the 7 is in the west, the 6 in the northwest, the 8 in the northeast, 4 in the southeast, and the 2 in the southwest. So, everybody is in their own original house this year. And of course, that makes us sometimes, I think, a little bit more like, oh, this is. I feel at home in myself, so I feel really strong, and only what I think and feel is right. So sometimes there's a little bit of ego that comes into play where we can easily become a little bit too stubborn in our own way and not looking at the greater picture, not really looking at what it is like to walk in somebody else's shoes, or to understand somebody a little bit better. And of course, I mean, this year in history, a 5 solar year is always an iffy year because it tends to there tends to be war in these years. And already, there are several places where things are iffy in the world right now. So let's really raise our vibration so that we maybe can circumnavigate any war, because aside from COVID, we don't need anything else in the world. I think we need things to get more peaceful and more fun again, rather than more difficult for everybody. Alex, please. Alex, you're muted. There.
As Bettina said, when 5 is in the center, 5 represents power and authority. And traditionally, many wars break out in number 5 years. World War I in 1914, World War II went global in 1941, the Korean War, 1950, even the United States Civil War. The roots of the war began with the 1860 election, which Abraham Lincoln won in a number 5 year, and then 3 months later, just when the year ended, Fort Sumter, the fighting began. So it's a very risky, potentially dangerous period. And right now, I think, as we all know, the three major countries in the world representing, to some extent, power and authority, number 5, are the United States, Russia, and China. And Russia is now on the verge of invading Ukraine. China is on the verge of seizing Taiwan, and America is trying to prevent both of these. But because all these are nuclear, thermonuclear powers, any kind of regional conflict could very easily escalate into a nuclear war and World War III. So it's a very, very dangerous time. It's almost as dangerous as any time since the end of the Cold War over a generation ago. I'd like to just briefly look at the energies of these three major superpowers to help us understand the dynamics. Russia is a number 1 water country, and 1 water corresponds with the cold and winter, and its main cereal grain is buckwheat, all of which, of course, correspond with traditional Russia. So Russia is a 1 water country here. China is traditionally a 5 soil country, corresponds with the center. It was known as the Middle Kingdom for thousands of years. Its color is yellow, the color of the center, and its traditional main grain was millet. The United States was traditionally classified as a 3-tree country. 3-tree represents early morning, early springtime, so it corresponds with newness, invention, also with justice and right. And so there's this very kind of righteous, self-righteous tradition in the United States, and the main grain is wheat, traditionally in the United States. So basing our understanding of these dynamics, we see that Russia actually would ordinarily support United States. One water nourishes 3-tree. 3-tree is actually opposite 5 soil, the soil energies, and tends to suppress to some extent. And there has been a long history of kind of love and conflict between America and China. And then China would overrule Russia to some extent, which it certainly did during the Cold War and the aftermath to some extent. But I think, as I reflected on our changing world, especially in the last few years in the 21st century, I've come to the view that the United States energy is no longer 3-tree, but it is now 9-fire. And I base this on looking again at the main food of today's culture and society. And the United States, wheat is no longer the main grain in this country. The main grain today, interestingly, following my talk a few minutes earlier on Cahokia, main grain in the United States today by far is corn. And corn is eaten not just or even primarily as corn on the cob or that kind of thing, but number 1, corn is processed, is added to processed foods in the form of GMO corn. 97% of all the corn in this country is genetically modified. It's also given to animals, so that almost virtually all of the animal food in this country that is not organic has a kind of what Bettina would call the energetic signature of corn. And then also corn, high fructose corn syrup has emerged over the last generation, has become now the #1 sweetener in the United States. It has long replaced sugar in soft drinks and in many other types of fast foods. High fructose corn syrup was introduced by scientists in Japan, I think in the late 1990s, and has now pretty much conquered the world. And then finally, corn is now consumed, not just by humans, but by our automobiles, our trucks, our buses, and our planes in the form of ethanol. About 10% of all the petroleum, or at least gasoline products, consumed in the United States contain ethanol. And so this has, of course, contributed greatly to world poverty and food shortages all over the world, because that corn could go to human consumption. So our nation has become a maize nation, very much in the tradition of Cahokia and the Aztecs and the Mayas. And so what we're seeing now is we've entered the third spiral of history, the digital era. We're finding that the United States is repeating the pattern of those earlier cultures that literally destroyed themselves with delusional ideologies. We have to be very, very careful. So let us this year start to study these cycles in nature so that we can learn from them. Also, in principle, number 5 governs not only conflict and war, but also peace and unification. And as Bettina said, if we can raise our vibration, if we can eat simply, if we can live a more natural life, and if we can learn to love one another, then this will create an energetic wave that will begin to influence and spiral out throughout the planet. So that is our hope and our prayer as the new year begins on February the 4th.
Thank you, Alex. So I think there's no more to say about this. So food for thought, and let's make the best of it. Are there any questions at this time about anything regarding the upcoming conference, about anything that has been discussed so far?
Bettina, I have a question for Alex. Alex, regarding the Cahokia demise and where we're headed, where does COVID and vaccination fit in to that process?
Yeah, well, that's certainly a good question. And I think we'll be looking at that at different angles in the course of our conference, as we have at past conferences. And my view, as I've explained in many lectures, is that COVID arose because of agricultural imbalance in a province in China, which has one of the highest pesticide rates in the world, so that the actual virus appears to have originated in the soil. And then it was taken up by bats, and then the bats made their way into Wuhan by the viral laboratory. And so it's still unclear whether the bats, the original virus that was taken to the lab in itself caused COVID, or whether it was tweaked for biowar weapons. There are two theories right now. But in any event, the virus in Yunnan did kill a number of miners. So it was a lethal virus, and it was 96% the same DNA signature of the current types of COVID that swept the world. So it has an agricultural foundation. Cahokia, again, did not have chemicals, and it did not have the kinds of epidemic diseases that were rampant in the old world in Asia and Africa. But of course, when contact came following Columbus and the conquistadors, they brought with them particularly typhus and to some extent smallpox, measles, and others. And it's estimated that up to 90% of the 40 or 50 million Native Americans passed away within the first 150 years of contact. So there's great potential for that kind of thing, again, in this country and all around the world. And we cannot underestimate COVID and the variants and new epidemics that are coming out.
Thank you.
Lynn had a question also. Lynn, if you would unmute yourself.
Yeah, I really am appreciative. I want to start with Bettina. I think when you're thinking of valleys and hills and vegetables, I just thought maybe a couple more minutes of understanding where your thought is with that, and based on your presentation. And then I wanted to show a couple artifacts and just thank Alex. I didn't know you came out with your third book, and I just didn't even know the second book. So I'm so excited because I've been so passionate about your work, Alex. And I'm very happy about that. Thank you so much. So I have a couple of artifacts from my native tradition that I'll show if you don't mind.
So Lynn, just to answer your question, I mean, I don't necessarily mean only lowlands. I mean, because there's people growing, like there's cities in the mountains as well. What I was trying to say is like remote areas versus so-called civilized populated areas, and because there are, of course, even populated areas that are like populated by some traditional indigenous groups, and they live very differently. I mean, but I'm talking about civilized population versus remote areas where there's really very little interaction from our civilized way of thinking and doing and being.
So taking food in from those vibrational worlds, it's good. It's really great. I'm glad you tapped it and touched it. And I'm very impressed with your diagram of that. I appreciate that. I think it needs, as we move into this time period, I feel like this is, there's a sense for me that I feel like teaching and educating around food and what types of food, because the quality of food has gone down. I'm in more of an urban area, so I totally understand this, the squash and so many different changes for me since I moved 12 years ago here. So it's a very different type food than the East Coast even, so these ideas of where we're moving with food and how the changes have happened. I think the trade markets and everything are changing. There's going to be a lot of change. There's going to be a lot of, and I've been working on social impact farms with Pakistan, and also here with one of the founding members of Good Earth. He has a farm. And so how can we make a difference with social impact farms and vibration? So I'd love to chat offline with you with that. That's exciting.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. And Alex, I would love to say hi and just share. This is one of my little artifacts, and I don't know if you can see it well enough. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, it's a corn baby, and this was given to me at an initiation probably about a year after we went through a naming ceremony, because I found out I was Native American when I was quite old. My great grandmother was Native, and my kids have Native on both sides. But so I worked with the Delaware Nation, and they called, my name means corn woman. I almost didn't want to say it when you were talking about the devastation, but with peace and all, this is such a good depiction of, they literally have this depth of this, holding this child, the tenderness of corn too. I love this depiction. And then the other one is from Tewa priests that gave me when we started the Stone Garden for World Peace. And this is all spirals, and it's all one piece. So I hold it during meditation a lot, but it's kind of hard to see, but you can see it's got the mound-like images, all the way around it. And I spent a lot of time around the mounds with the Delaware Nation. And I love your exploration on this early village. I'm very excited about that. So thank you so much. And a lot of the religious organizations have founded their organizations in that region. Like the Presbytery is in that region, and they did a really early foundation of our Constitution. So it's very interesting to me. It's just kind of, you know, in Kentucky and St. Louis. So anyway, that's kind of what my two-piece, but I'm curious on what your thoughts are with 9-Star Key in the first of the year. Are we going into what house in February do we go into?
I
Well,
don't
February is a two soil house.
It's a two-soil house.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So,
But there is another person who has raised their hand, and that's Rob. Rob, if you want to.
Hi,
Go.
everyone. Alex, what fantastic work studying that that thing that nobody in America knows about, or very few do know about.
Okay.
Is there a large scale excavation project on that? I mean, I can't believe that this is something that is now showing up.
No, there's a large scale excavation, and it's open to the public. I haven't visited it myself, but apparently it's almost, I think, it may be a national park even. Anyway, there's a lot of activity. There've been a lot of archaeological work over the years. So it's not just a new discovery. It's just been basically ignored for a long time.
I see. Yeah, and certainly through Ancient Aliens and other television shows, there's a lot of discussion about sacred mounds throughout the U.S. And it's just very intriguing because there's no touchstone as to what experts now are referring them to. So
Yeah, well, the interesting point is that almost all of these people were farmers. They were not hunter-gatherers. Yeah, they were like tens of thousands or 10,000 years ago, but for the last 5,000 years, it was settled agriculture for almost all of this country. And that goes against everything that we've been taught in school.
it's amazing. Thank you.
All right. Alex, would you like to share about the planetary health activities?
Yes, thank you, Bettina. Yes, as we mentioned, Planetary Health is the sponsoring organization for this conference. I think, as many of you know, we started about 22 years ago. Yeah, Edward Esco and myself, we founded Planetary Health, originally to protect the natural food supply in California, where Monsanto had announced that it was going to introduce GMO corn or GMO rice in the Sacramento Valley. So we organized farmers, we organized national grassroots campaign, and over the course of several years, with many allies in the health and environmental field, we were able to protect the corn. Corn's on my mind tonight. We were able to protect the rice, and Monsanto went down to defeat, as it did a few years later when we also came back and did the same thing for wheat. So our macrobiotic community has been on the forefront of protecting our cereal grains. Unfortunately, we did lose the GMO corn because that started before we launched our campaign. That was actually the first grain that was engineered in this country. And very unfortunately, I don't mean to demonize corn in my presentations this evening, but there I think is some truth to the fact that you can take too much corn, and so it needs to be eaten in moderation. So over the last 20 years, we've been involved in these social campaigns for the for the National World Food Supply. We've also been involved in publishing. We have a newsletter now in its 22nd year, quarterly newsletter. And then when the Kushi Institute closed in 2016, Bettina, Ed, and myself, we immediately took over the summer conference and are running that now under Planetary Health. We developed the winter conference. We've been working with a local hospital to develop a diabetes medical study. And anyway, slowly but surely, we've been adding different activities. And you'll be hearing about one of our most exciting projects a little bit later this week with Sherry Damaris and the filmmaker Marley Snyder, who's a very young, dynamic filmmaker. They're going to be giving a presentation on The Spirit of Rice, which is a full-length documentary film that we have been making this past year at South River Farm, which is where Christian Elwell and also the South River Miso Company is located. Anyway, it's a wonderful film, and you'll be hearing about that and perhaps seeing some of the trailers and the outtakes and preview of what we're doing on that very exciting project. So we invite you to check out we have many websites. The main one right now is planetaryhealth.com, which has a small online shop with some of our new books and other study materials. Our other websites include coronavirusanddiet.com. When the pandemic started, we immediately started posting articles on diet, COVID, and more recently on vaccines. We've also had one earlier on ebolaanddiet.com that we developed when Micho, before he passed away, and which was a much earlier epidemic. We also have Macropedia.com, spelled with a K, M-A-K, which is a site which summarizes all of the medical research on macrobiotics from A to Z over the last generation. We have the summerconference.com, macrobioticsummerconference.com website with news of all of our conference and educational activities. And then our allied website is Culinary Medical School that Bettina runs and has all of her wonderful classes and activities. So please check that out as well. Okay, so back over to you.
All right, so this will then conclude. Lynn, I see that you have posted some questions about what about Micho and Mounds, Nebraska, and pyramids is the first. And yes, of course, I mean, GMO mosquitoes are released into the US now, so there are, other things that we definitely have to pay attention to. But I think for tonight, Lynn, let's postpone the questions for another
Yeah.
time, simply because it's getting late. I don't wish to keep people up really late. However, tomorrow, thank you. Tomorrow, we will see everybody at 2 for the cooking class with Melanie Waxman, Creative Winter Cooking. So looking forward to seeing you then, and have a wonderful night, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. Good night.
Thank you. Good
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
So blessed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night.